He woke with a start and an audible yell. He was immediately out of his sleeping bag and checked his GPS and cell phone. No signal from either one. "Fuck," he said out loud. This GPS was guaranteed to work anywhere, and he had never even seen the no signal text before. He switched it off and let it reboot. He waited till it came up. Still no signal. He put it away. Luckily, the sun was just coming up. He was relieved to hear the forest back to normal sounding. He had a quick breakfast of a power bar and some trail mix, and then set his mind to finding out his position. He had enough food for 2 weeks, and possibly enough water, but he had been counting on the streams and the river on the mountain for his long-term water consumption. He climbed a pine tree to get a vantage point and to make out landmarks, if any. All he needed to see was Bear Mountain. A few scratches later, and he was high enough to get a good look. His heart sank and his mouth went dry. Bear Mountain was nowhere to be seen. Just the low, rolling hills of forest in all directions. This honestly scared him more than anything else that had happened in the last 24 hours. He was lost. He was still for a few minutes and tried to think. He tried to force his mind to make sense of this. He just couldn't. It just didn't line up with reality. He felt like he was in some bad horror movie. He looked out again in all directions, using his binoculars to scan for any sign of anything he could use as a reference. There. What was that? He saw through the binoculars and his shaky hands what appeared to be a smokestack. Yes, some old factory maybe. Even better, some factory with people in it, though he doubted this. He carefully got out his compass. Thank God for analog technology, he thought. He marked the heading, triple-checked it, and then tried to calculate the distance. This was very difficult at best. He estimated the building to be between 5 and 6 miles away. He did think further than that, but he was unsure. Given the elevation changes in the thick forest, he could go roughly 2.5 to 3 miles each hour, which meant he could reach the point in possibly 2 hours. A very short hike for him. Excited to be focused on something, he climbed down the tree, packed up, hoisted his pack on, and set off to what he hoped would be a way out of this nightmare. How could he have gotten so far off track, he wondered. How had he gotten lost such a short distance from his destination? What the hell was happening with him losing time? This frightened him greatly. Why wasn't the cell or GPS picking up a signal? And what in the hell was making those noises he heard? All these thoughts swam in his mind as he walked. He had to really force himself to push all of this out of his head for now. He needed to be focused. He had to accept he was indeed lost and his situation could be dire. He also knew that this smokestack, or whatever it was, didn't mean very much. He just didn't understand why it was out here, and that added to his confusion. But if it was some man-made structure, it might mean an old service road that would lead him to a state road, and that meant a town. As he walked, he checked the compass frequently to make sure he was holding the line, while also paying close attention to the time. He did not want to stray off course or walk past this thing. At the 1 hour mark, he stopped to have a very light breakfast. He realized he did not eat after waking this morning. He sat on a fallen tree and tried to enjoy it. Still nothing on his cell phone, and still nothing on the GPS. So many things just didn't make sense. He could not come to any logical conclusion as to why or what was happening. It felt like he was in some alternate reality, or unreality, if there was such a thing.
David!
Hello? Who said that? Hello? His voice was angry, frightened, confused, and desperate. Who's there? His voice broke from the strain and force. Absolutely no sound. Dead silent. He stood perfectly still, his eyes and ears straining, his entire being somewhere between the fight and flight response. He didn't move for a full minute. Was he hallucinating? He didn't think so. He trusted his senses despite how fucked up everything had become. His mind was intact despite the fear that was like a black hole in his very core. Someone has said his name. The dead quiet of the forest made him realize he was breathing way too quickly. He was panicked. He tried to settle his breathing and tried to quiet his mind. Whatever was happening around him, he had to fight it. He hoisted his pack and checked the compass and the time. Another hour, and he should be very close to whatever he had seen. The time. According to time, 6 hours had passed since he started off at daybreak. He stared at the numbers as if waiting for them to change back. He looked for the sun. It was low and to the west, indicating the time shown was correct. This was the second time he had lost hours worth of time. Just go, he said to himself. He started walking with much more purpose and determination than any walk he'd ever done in his life. With the sun setting behind him, he started to notice the trees were changing. The thick evergreen was turning over to, well, just dead trees. Branches gone, bark fallen away, just trunks running up like spikes. The ground cover was also changing from thick leaf and pine needles to a strange dark plant that he had never seen before. Perhaps a fire some years back. That was not uncommon, and oddities can sprout up in the place of ash. Near the end of that hour, the train went steadily uphill. It would allow him to get a view, and the dead trees would make it much easier to see his surroundings. The ground leveled beneath his feet, and he immediately had a sprawling view of a valley below him. It was near full dark, but he had just a bit of light left. He looked out, and what he had been looking for was clearly visible. He let out an audible sigh of relief. A massive factory of some sort lay not half a mile down below him. It looked like something from the 1800s, but it was hard to say, and he could see the light reflecting from the scarce pieces of glass that still remained in the massive windows. All around it was dead forest. They stood like stones in a graveyard. A chill went through his body, and he shuddered from the sight of the place. He was so entranced by it all that he almost didn't notice a covered bridge that crossed a stream. This gave him a mighty dose of encouragement, something he hadn't had in 2 miserable days. He could possibly find the stream on the map, not to mention he now had a source of precious water. He started to go straight down to it and camp near or even in the ancient building, but decided it was just too dark. He would camp here in plain sight, and at first light he would make his way down to what he hoped was salvation.